end of one of the equal abstractive sets which belongs to the area as an abstractive element. Two momental areas lying in the same moment can cut each other in a momental segment which is not necessarily rectilinear. Such a segment can also be defined as an abstractive element. It is then called a momental route. We will not delay over any general consideration of these momental routes, nor is it important for us to proceed to the still wider investigation of vagrant routes in general. There are, however, two simple sets of routes which are of vital importance. One is a set of momental routes, and the other of vagrant routes. Both sets can be classed together as straight routes. We proceed to define them without any reference to the definitions of volumes and surfaces. The two types of straight routes will be called rectilinear routes and stations. Rectilinear routes are momental routes, and stations are vagrant routes. Rectilinear routes are routes which in a sense lie in rects. Any two event particles on a rect define the set of event particles which lie between them on that rect. Let the satisfaction of the condition σ by an abstractive set mean that the two given event particles and the event particles lying between them on the rect all lie in every event belonging to the abstractive set. The group of σ primes, where σ has this meaning, form an abstractive element. Such abstractive elements are rectilinear routes. They are the segments of instantaneous straight lines which are the ideals of exact perception. Our actual perception, however exact, will be the perception of a small event sufficiently far down one of the abstractive sets of the abstractive element. A station is a vagrant route, and no moment can intersect any station in more than one event particle. Thus a station carries with it a comparison of the positions in their respective moments of the event particles covered by it. Rects arise from the intersection of moments, but as yet no properties of events have been mentioned by which any analogous vagrant loci can be found out. The general problem for our investigation is to determine a method of comparison of position in one instantaneous space with positions in other instantaneous spaces. We may limit ourselves to the spaces of the parallel moments of one time system. How are positions in these various spaces to be compared? In other words, what do we mean by motion? It is the fundamental question to be asked of any theory of relative space, and like many other fundamental questions it is apt to be left unanswered. It is not an answer to reply that we all know what we mean by motion. Of course we do, so far as sense awareness is concerned. I am asking that your theory of space should provide nature with something to be observed. You have not settled the question by bringing forward a theory according to which there is nothing to be observed, and by then reiterating that nevertheless we do observe this non-existent fact. Unless motion is something as a fact in nature, kinetic energy and momentum, and all that depends on these physical concepts, evaporate from our list of physical realities. Even in this revolutionary age, my conservationism resolutely opposes the identification of momentum and moonshine. Accordingly, I assume it as an axiom that motion is a physical fact. It is something that we perceive as in nature. Motion presupposes rest, until theory arose to vitiate immediate intuition. That is to say, to vitiate the uncriticized judgments which immediately arise from sense awareness. No one doubted that in motion you leave behind that which is at rest. Abraham in his wanderings left his birthplace where it had ever been. A theory of motion and a theory of rest are the same thing viewed from different aspects with altered emphasis. You cannot have a theory of rest without in some sense admitting a theory of absolute position. It is usually assumed that relative space implies that there is no absolute position. That is, according to my creed, a mistake. The assumption arises from the failure to make another distinction, namely, that there may be alternative definitions of absolute position. This possibility enters with the admission of alternative time systems. Thus the series of spaces in the parallel moments of one temporal series may have their own definition of absolute position, correlating sets of event particles in these successive spaces, so that each set consists of event particles, one from each space, all with the property of possessing the same absolute position in that series of spaces. Such a set of event particles will form a point in the timeless space of that time system. Thus a point is really an absolute position in the timeless space of a given time system. But there are alternative time systems, and each time system has its own peculiar group of points, that is to say, its own peculiar definition of absolute position. This is exactly the theory which I will elaborate. In looking to nature for evidence of absolute position, it is of no use to recur to the four-dimensional manifold of event particles. This manifold has been obtained by the extension of thought beyond the immediacy of observation. We shall find nothing in it except what we have put there to represent the ideas in thought which arise from our direct sense awareness of nature. To find evidence of the properties which are to be found in the manifold of event particles, we must always recur to the observation of relations between events. Our problem is to determine those relations between events which issue in the property of absolute position in a timeless space. This is, in fact, the problem of the determination of the very meaning of the timeless spaces of physical science. In reviewing the factors of nature as immediately disclosed in sense awareness, we should note the fundamental character of the precept of being here. We discern an event merely as a factor in a determinate complex in which each factor has its own peculiar share. There are two factors which are always ingredient in this complex. One is the duration which is represented in thought by the concept of all nature that is present now, and the other is the peculiar locus standi for mind involved in the sense awareness. This locus standi in nature is what is represented in thought by the concept of here, namely of an event here. This is the concept of a definite factor in nature. This factor is an event in nature which is the focus in nature for that act of awareness, and the other events are perceived as referred to it. This event is part of the associated duration. I call it the percipient event. This event is not the mind, that is to say, not the percipient. It is in that nature from which the mind perceives. The complete foothold of the mind in nature is represented by the pair of events, namely, the present duration which marks the when of awareness, and the percipient event which marks the where of awareness and the how of awareness. This percipient event is roughly speaking the bodily life of the incarnate mind. But this identification is only a rough one, for the functions of the body shade off into those of other events in nature, so that for some purposes the percipient event is to be reckoned as merely part of the bodily life, and for other purposes it may even be reckoned as more than the bodily life. In many respects the demarcation is purely arbitrary, depending on where in a sliding scale you choose to draw the line. I have already in my previous lecture on time discussed the association of mind with nature. The difficulty of the discussion lies in the liability of constant factors to be overlooked. We never note them by contrast with their absences. The purpose of a discussion of such factors may be described as being to make obvious things look odd. We cannot envision them unless we manage to invest them with some of the